I gave just like the briefest context of how we first met. Maureen, for undergrad, is a graduate of USC, and we met because we both had actually applied and were interviewing for things within the critical studies program at USC, which is sort of more like the film studies classes that are here at William and Mary. And Maureen is sort of now an amazing film scholar, film historian, film journalist, and many things beyond that too. But I'm curious, especially for, and I guess what's the demographic? I think you can see a little bit of the room, Maureen, but I'm curious, we've got like a great group who's here, but I'm curious, do we have like film students, theater, journalism, like interested in writing, a mix thereof, pop culture enthusiasts who across the board? So it sounds like we've got a good mix here, Maureen, but curious to hear, or for you to kind of share with the room a little bit about your background that wasn't more of like a liberal arts sort of program as opposed to like film production program. And I know we've kind of had conversations about the distinctions thereof and kind of the value of coming out of a program like that and where it took you then academically, because you've had some great experiences there, and now to your very amazing career that we'll talk about in more depth.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I personally am always a champion of liberal arts education over a technical education, because I feel like it's something you can only get in a university setting, whereas technical education is in many ways a lot easier to come by, and is something you can sort of learn on the job if you have to. So I was a critical studies major, as you said, at USC, which is basically the analysis and history of film. I believe they've now changed the degree to media studies because film is not as common a medium, perhaps.
I tried to Google it when I sent you the questions to see if I was getting the wording right, and I didn't see it, but I was like, well, she'll correct me if that's not, but that's interesting.
Yeah. No, that was what it's called, but now they've shifted it to include, you know, television and the internet and all sorts of things. And then I was also a double major in history and a minor in theater. And I've always had a real strong interest in the past, hence the history double major. Surprisingly, those two things were radically different topics. Like, I really did the history of film, and I'm a huge fan of old Hollywood in the film degree, but then I studied Elizabethan Renaissance England in my history degree. But both of those things like really taught me to analyze, how to interrogate primary and secondary sources, and most importantly, how to write and how to shape your writing depending on what audience you are writing to. And I also actually went on to do a master's in history, thinking maybe I wanted to go into academia, changing my mind. But even though I don't often write about Elizabethan England unless there happens to be a new film about Shakespeare or something like that, I do still feel like the skills I acquired were very useful, because I like to say that journalists are historians of the present day, because in essence, we are doing the same thing. We're talking to sources and we're writing a story so that our audiences can read it and understand something about whatever it is we're writing about, whether it's a film, a TV show, or a political event, it doesn't matter. And it's the same for historians. Like, cultural historians will write about plays or pieces of art of the past. It's just, as journalists, we maybe, depending on what you're writing about, get to actually speak to your sources because they are alive. So yeah, and then I guess just as a little button on that, I did eventually get a second master's in entertainment journalism, just to sort of brush up on some of the skills of that world that I was maybe less familiar with. But again, all sort of very broad liberal arts writing focused studies.
That's awesome. I feel like will be relatable to a lot of the kind of the nature of the William and Mary experience, and what students really bring out of the experience from here and then take it to the careers, and that you all hear from a lot of the other alums who are around this weekend. But we'll now like take a step back, and because you have a very fun title of sort of this pop culture obsession, and you are probably one of the most like pop culture literate people I've known since even however many scary long years ago that was. But what were some of those earliest things that hooked you in, whether it's film, whether it is in some of those other mediums, if it's things that sucked you into that academic interest also in that Elizabethan, but just for the fun of context.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the Elizabethan thing, this crowd might be a little too young for it, but there were these young royals diaries when I was in 4th or 5th grade that were purportedly written by Elizabeth I, Marie Antoinette, and I got really obsessed with those. And then I got really obsessed with Henry VIII and his 6 wives and Anne Boleyn, and it was kind of just a fall down a rabbit hole from there. On the film side of things, like I've always loved theater and performing and musicals, and I would say that I probably came to theater first before I realized my love of film. And my love of film has a really funny backstory because my parents were very strict about what I could watch, and so I was only allowed to watch PG and G films, and then I could watch PG-13 once I was 13 and R once I was 17, with very few exceptions, and they were always academic exceptions if something was like in class.
I read you pretty shrewd about making that argument, though. If anyone's going to make a compelling case, I think it would be you. But
true, I did not win on Titanic, sadly, but weirdly, that is what made me into a cinephile, because when you can't watch anything with those ratings, you turn on TCM and or get DVDs from, or VHSs even, from the video store and watch unrated things from the past. And so that's sort of how I discovered and fell in love with classic Hollywood through many of the classics like The Quiet Man, Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, and just started getting really obsessed with the stars of that era and the whole like ethos and vibe of it. And actually, the reason I decided to go into critical studies and not production is because I did a summer program at USC before I graduated high school, and it was all critical studies based, and I just absolutely adored it and realized that that was more sort of the realm I wanted to be in. I truly didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I didn't at that time really have any intention of being a journalist. I thought I wanted to go into production. I changed my mind about what I wanted to do, whether it was production design or producing or casting, many times, and ended up doing none of those things.
relatable sentiment, I get it. So, and I think a lot of this group has maybe already been there even during your academics, or you'll be there, and if you are, you're not alone. And I guess because you talked about kind of this varied career interests, and part of the festival and this workshop series in the festival is that guests really speak a lot to what that first opportunity was, or that first thing that they said yes to. Maybe it was a little bit outside their lane, but it was sort of that way in, whether it was being a PA or an intern or apprenticeships, things like that. What were some of those, whether in production or later on in journalism, that kind of was that entry point for you?
Absolutely. Like I have a very distinct particular one, because I really wasn't making any inroads in production, and I think part of that was because I left Los Angeles for a year to do a master's in history, even though I spent all of my time during that degree just seeing theater. But when I came back, I got an internship with the American Film Institute, AFI, who has an amazing archive and does a lot of work to preserve film history. also has a film school of their own. But the thing they're most known for is their annual film festival and Life Achievement Award. And I was an intern specifically for the film festival. I was hired as a social media and marketing intern, neither of which of those things I really had any formal training or experience in, and just kind of made it my own because they didn't really have a blueprint for what they wanted the intern to do in the weeks leading up to the festival. And then at this time, I was still very uncertain. Like, I had just come back from England where I did my master's, and was looking for a job and really didn't know what I wanted to do. Was throwing my hat in so many different rings, including like interviewing to work at an agency mailroom, which, unless you want to be an agent, would not recommend. And this internship I got because of some friends from undergrad who worked for AFI. And when the actual festival started, we had this plan that each of the nights, the festival's a week, and each night they have a different like premiere gala screening with a big red carpet on Hollywood Boulevard. And so our game plan was that for social media, I would go to the red carpet, to the press pen, and just take photos of talent and get whatever color I could from what I could hear around me. So I was not supposed to be doing interviews. That was not something I was asked to do. And we didn't really discuss it. It just wasn't part of the tasks I was given. And it was the premiere of Saving Mr. Banks, about the making of Mary Poppins. And I was at the very end of the press line, where it sort of moves from photo to actual interview. And this publicist comes up to me and goes, "Are you ready for BJ and Jason?" As in BJ Novak and Jason Schwartzman. And I truly do not know what possessed me. I had no questions prepared. I said yes.
That's absolutely the answer to that question. Well done.
So then I like start making up questions on the fly. Luckily, like, I know Disney, I know Mary Poppins from my interest in film history, and I knew enough about both of their careers that I could totally just make up questions on the fly. There were other films during the festival that I would not have been quite as quick on my feet. But so I started like interviewing them and then like texting the answers back to my supervisor in the media war room, like
were they like, "What's going on? What are you doing?" Or were they like, "Cool, we're running with this"?
Yeah, well, so that they could tweet it out. And yeah, it was like, "Oh, where are you getting this? Like, who did they say this to?" And I was like, "Oh, to me, like, I'm doing the interview."
You're the outlet. You're this.
Yeah. And they were like, "Oh, great, keep going." And so then I like interviewed Emma Thompson and the Sherman brothers and like several other people in the course of the night. And then they loved what I did so much that they were like, "Great, like, let's actually make this part of our game plan. We'll get you a reserved spot on the carpet. Here's the rest of the films that are premiering and the list of the talent that's coming through so you can prepare questions." And that was sort of the moment where I was like, I think I want to do this like for a job. So, and then that's what led me to apply to the master's program in entertainment journalism. And from there, I made a bunch of other contacts and got internships that led me to the job I have now.
And I guess I know they probably would have read it in your bio, but I guess now is a good point. You can kind of say your official role at EW now, and I think this is a great entry point for sort of some of your, I know what some of my favorite of your EW projects are, but I'm going to see what you say first, and then I'll apply you for information about other things accordingly.
Yes. So I'm a senior writer at Entertainment Weekly. I
saw the transition from print to digital only, right? You were through that whole process of.
I've seen many transitions. I'll have been there 6 years in April. I started as an intern. I was an intern for a year. sadly, that version of our internship program does not exist anymore. But when I did it, it was amazing because you basically were like a news writer, and then you actually got to like do interviews and produce content for the site. You weren't just like checking someone's email or something. And from there, I became what is called a permalancer, which means you're not officially on staff, but you work full time for the magazine. And then I became a staff writer and then a senior writer. And in that time, the magazine has moved from New York to Los Angeles as its primary home base. It went from weekly to monthly, and then it went from being a print magazine to being digital only. So it's definitely been a journey of weathering changes in the media industry. But did you? I have, and I can start sharing my screen again if you want me to share.
I think now's a great time to go through a few of the memorable moments, and again,
Sure.
I think I know what some of them are. Otherwise, I'll follow you for details about other things.
That's the right thing. No, that's wrong. Hold on.
Yeah. And we'll save time at the end for questions, but if anyone in the room has anything that comes up in real time as we're talking, raise your hand here and I'll shout when we can.
Okay, so I feel like, sorry, were there any questions before I go into this?
I think we're good for now.
Okay, great. So sort of keeping in line with the title of my presentation, something that I really love about my work, and specifically it being about at EW, is that they believe and I believe that writing about something that you're super passionate about, that you are obsessed with and consider yourself like an expert in, always results in better journalism. And I think that's true of most things in life. And I definitely do find ways in my work to sort of work in my interest in history. For instance, there was a show called The Spanish Princess about Catherine of Aragon and her marriage to Henry VIII. And I wrote recaps, but instead of writing a traditional TV recap, I wrote historical fact checking the show. And by the plot points of the show, I would tell viewers like what the real history was, how accurate they got it, that kind of thing. And then in terms of my old Hollywood love, like anytime there's a chance to write a story about something from the past, I ran a column for it. I used to do it every month when we still had the print magazine. Now it's farther between. But it was a Hollywood history column where I attempted to connect a new release or something that was happening currently in the zeitgeist to a moment in Hollywood history. So for instance, when Cruella was released, I wrote a story about the original live action Cruella, Mary Wicks, who was a famous character actress. You've definitely seen her if you've watched White Christmas or Postcards from the Edge, Sister Act. She was in a ton of stuff. But she was actually the live action model for Cruella. So wrote a story about her doing that and like how that fit into her career. But getting to the good stuff. So these are two cover stories that I wrote, one on Bridgerton and one on Glass Onion. And they're just great examples of how that those pop culture obsessions can come to light. So I'm a huge romance reader. I told our editor,
writer, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but we'll get there. But yeah, good.
But and while I was still an intern, I actually started a column here. That's still going. That's it was monthly, now it's quarterly, review column of new romance releases. So I had read Bridgerton and knew who Julia Quinn was long before Shondaland optioned the books. And the moment that they optioned them, I told my editors, I was like, this is going to be huge. Like, romance readers have been waiting for a really long time for something like this to be adapted. The fact that it's Shondaland means they're going to do it correctly. They didn't really listen to me the first time. And then, as you may know, it became the biggest show on Netflix ever. So then for the second season, we did do a cover story because I was right. Um, and that was really cool. And that was a great example of the story really combined my love of history because it's set in Regency England. It combined a lot of my like research and interests have been about like women in film and media and women in history. And so I really got to just write a story about sort of the gossip industry in the show and how we frame things that are traditionally made for women, like romance, and bring all of that to bear in the cover story. And then Knives Out is another great example of like, I've always been obsessed with whodunits and detective fiction. And in a previous career, when I worked at a university, in a space with exhibitions, I co-curated an exhibit on fictional detectives. So then I got to bring all of that interest and skill and study into interviewing this incredible ensemble cast and writing about Glass Onion. And then just as like a fun thing, since we've gone all digital, we do a lot of motion assets with our covers. So I was on set for this, and basically it's like we've got the setup where they'll take photos, but then we'll film in motion, and people are sort of halfway in between their real selves and their characters. And this is a great example of like how you can use your obsession to collaborate with your art team. So we sort of decided, since it was a holiday movie preview, that we would do something holiday-y. So it's like a Christmas or a New Year's Eve party, but still wanted to have that like air of mystery. So there's lots of Easter eggs like knives and different things hidden in the set. This next one is one I'm really proud of because I have always been obsessed with Clue, the game, and the 1985 film. And so we decided that as part of our cover coverage, we would introduce the new cast as if they were characters on a Clue card. So I'll just let this play for a minute.
That's awesome. And I will share, you didn't do Glass Onion, but this group probably knows the original Knives Out production designer is also William and Mary alum, David Crank. I don't know if he's around with us at all this year, but he's been in years past and will be back. But so William and Mary has a little bit of a tie in there, but he didn't need to. And this is amazing, Maureen.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, this is a great example of like incredible collaboration in terms of like our photo director was like Clue. We were just throwing out ideas when we were first brainstorming the cover, and she said Clue, and I was like, oh, what if we often will do like a sidebar in a print story of like, here's all the new cast members and what you should know about them. And I was like, what if we did that, but we did it as Clue cards? And then our designer ran with that, and we took the individual like motion assets we made of these actors to make these, and then I came up with all of the sort of monikers of the scientists, the brains or whatever, since I'd seen the film. I'm trying to remember what's next. Yes. Okay. Yes. So this is the thing I am proudest of. To quote Eliza Hamilton, let me show you what I'm proudest of. Because I have been obsessed with the Muppets since I was a small child. Whenever people would ask me what my dream interview was, the answer is Kermit the Frog. And I also, in recent years, have become a huge Ted Lasso fan, and came to realize that Brett Goldstein, who plays Roy Kent, was like the biggest Muppet Christmas Carol fan in the world. And so over a year before we did this, I had this crazy idea. We do this series around the table where we speak to a cast about their experience making a film. And I knew it was going to be the 30th anniversary of Muppet Christmas Carol. And I pitched to my editors, like, what if we do an around the table, but it's not with the performers and the like actual director of the film. it's with the actual Muppets about their memories of making Muppet Christmas Carol. And then I was like, and what if we have Brett Goldstein moderate it? And they're like, okay, great. Like, we love that. Probably not going to happen, but go away to your little corner and pursue it. And I spent a year working with Disney and Brett's team to make this happen. We shot it the day after Brett won his second Emmy, like very early in the morning. I'm sure he probably was tired from parties the night before, but I was like thanking him for doing it. He's like, are you kidding? This is better than winning an Emmy. And it was really amazing to be present to see his dream coming true as well as mine. So I'll just give you this little clip, which was from the end of the interview. Highly recommend. I'm tooting my own horn a little bit, but highly recommend watching the whole thing because it's just like really.
I will co-sign on that. You should watch it. It's epic.
It's really delightful. And that was a really cool process too, where it's like I'd taken some screenwriting classes, but I also work as a journalist. So I got to work with Brett over email and then in person that morning, writing questions and sort of tailoring his script. And then I was working as a producer on the set a little bit, being like, Brett, can you ask this question again? Or can we try this or take this direction? So I was being the journalist who was like coming up with the questions and the content and ultimately wrote the story, but also bringing to bear like all of my knowledge as someone who studied film as well. But here is just a little clip for you to enjoy.
Blessings, everyone.
So nice, Robert. Thank you.
It would also be nice, Uncle Kermit.
What's that?
Bless us all.
And
Who gathered here,
oh,
but loving family.
oh boy. Oh,
No. Bring me back from where.
come on, Brett, sing out. Bless us all, and as we live, we always comfort and forgive. We have so much that we can share with those in need we see around us everywhere. Bless us all
Gather here.
gather here. What's that?
And I do want to note that I had put on the call sheet like a wish for a song at the end, but that was kind of it. That was not like planned, and the Muppets still sang in perfect harmony, and Brett knew all the words. So there you go.
And I will say Maureen had like the most mic drop of Christmas cards because I opened my mail last December and it's a Christmas card of Maureen and Brett Goldstein and the Muppets.
Speaking
so,
of,
Yes.
is
oh, there we go.
so here's just a little sampling of some of the ways that I've turned my pop culture obsession into a career. So here's this picture of me with Brett and the Muppets, which yes, was my Christmas card that said, God bless us, everyone. And like, I truly cannot, I welcome all questions on the experience because it was the best day of my life. And I cannot recommend meeting Kermit more than any other life experience. 10 out of 10, highly recommend. But also, so I cover awards shows and do a lot of awards history. So that's me on the top right at last year's Oscars, where I was in the press room, where I got to watch in real time the live uncut feed of the infamous Will Smith Chris Rock slap. And then here on the bottom right is an example of some of more of my passion for books and history. I cover Outlander as a show for us, but I also read the novels. And when the previous Outlander book came out in fall 2021, Penguin Random House invited me to New York to sit down with Diana Gabaldon and be the moderator and host for the virtual live launch event that was going around the world. And I think you can start to get a sense of how all of these things that I grew up loving, studied in school, have been my interests my whole life, have now become the thing that I do for work every day, which is weird and great.
So we've talked about a lot of really epic wins and amazing things, but I think sometimes really helpful stories from events like this are the thing that didn't go quite right, or the slip up, or the thing that you're kind of problem solving on the fly. And do you have any, either from like early intern days? I mean, obviously you had an epic win with the Sherman brothers and the Mr. Banks, but anything that comes to mind that you're like, oh, that day was really cringe, but I learned a lot from it, and I'm going to share it with this room now to preempt the same thing in the future.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird one in terms of before I decided to pivot more full-time to journalism, I was working full-time at USC for the USC libraries as an admin assistant for a sort of intellectual institute that was housed within the libraries, but the library's communications department more broadly, who hosted events and curated exhibitions. And when I had signed on to the job, it had kind of been with the understanding of, I'm just out of grad school, I'm not sure what I'm doing yet. And it was like, yeah, that's great. This is a university setting. Like, we'll give you all the flexibility you need. You can do another degree, which I did end up doing with the journalism degree. And that'll be great. And the last like year-ish, maybe a little more that I was there, all of a sudden that like flexibility that had never been a problem started going away, and started having a lot of conflict between me sort of pursuing these other more long-term career goals outside of my day job. That very much became like a spot of tension between me and one of my supervisors, and ultimately ended up quitting without anything else lined up, and then was like, okay, we'll see what happens next. And I don't regret anything about the sequence of events, but I do wish that my exit had been like a little neater and not come under duress and me feeling really limited. But at the same time, I feel like sometimes those situations are necessary, because it's really easy to get comfortable in a job that is not the right space for you, but you can kind of just coast along, and you like the people you're working with, and the work you're doing is pleasant. And I definitely, before things sort of took a turn there, was starting to feel that way. And I was like, yeah, maybe I'll just work in the university setting and do my little creative projects on the side. And it really, that change and sort of being in that miserable space for a while led me to take the leap without a safety net and explore what I wanted to do next, and pick up some internships, and ultimately put me at EW as an intern, and led to me being where I am now. And I don't think I would have had the courage, or maybe the foolhardiness to do that if things hadn't gotten so kind of tense and untenable in that previous position. And I really pride myself on being someone who, I've always been a teacher's pet. I'm a people pleaser. So it was really difficult for me to be in a situation where my direct manager and I were just not seeing eye to eye on anything. And I was extremely frustrated. I also do want to say though, like I'm so grateful to my parents. My mom let me live with her, and the only reason I was able to do that is because I wasn't paying rent. And I don't want to give anyone like an unrealistic expectation of just like quit your job and figure it out. Like there was familial support there as well.
Yeah, sometimes there's that leap of faith moment, or that realization moment, and that little bit of risk that unfortunately is at play with the nature of these industries. But it's really awesome to see kind of the trajectory that's led to. And I know we had another few questions kind of outlined out, but I want to make sure we have questions for anyone in the room. But you talked about sort of your interest in the book world as a journalist, but obviously you have an exciting moment coming up as an author yourself. And publishing, this festival has changed from kind of like you talked about the media studies. This festival is a film festival that now is sort of a wider arts festival. Publishing plays more of a role throughout. And so tell us about the big moment that's coming up this summer, right?
Yes, this summer. Let's see, hold on. There we go. So my debut novel is coming out in July. It's just a further extension of the theme of this presentation and everything we've been talking about. It's called It Happened One Fight. It is about a leading man and leading lady in 1937, the golden age of, or 36, golden age of Hollywood, who absolutely detest each other. They discover they were married by accident on set, and have to go to Reno for a divorce for 6 weeks. And while they're in Reno and making another film, they realize maybe they don't hate each other so much after all. And this is like such a perfect example of how all of these things can sort of coalesce, because my agent and my editor were all people I met through doing a lot of books coverage. And I feel like that just automatically meant that, I mean, the work still had to be good, but it got my foot in the door, and it meant that people would read my writing and consider taking me on because they knew my reputation as a writer and someone already working in the genre in a different capacity. And then the inciting incident here was actually inspired by an interview I did. I was interviewing Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder for a movie they did called Destination Wedding. This is maybe a good example of not a mistake, but a happy accident, because the movie was called Destination Wedding. So I asked a very like straightforward question about what do you guys think of destination weddings? Like, are you a fan or not? And Winona, being Winona, just goes, like, gives a little bit of an answer, and then she's like, oh, but Keanu, we're married. And he's like, what? And sort of she goes into this explanation of how there was a real Romanian priest on the set of Dracula, and they did the full ceremony. And so in the eyes of whatever Romanian Orthodox church, they are married. And Keanu, of course, ran with it. And that was like 4 years ago now, and kind of broke the internet. But then it sort of got me thinking, like, oh, what if that happened, but like happened somehow for real, and they weren't friends like Keanu and Winona, but instead like really detested each other. And then I've always loved screwball comedies and classic Hollywood. So I was like, and what if it was set in the 1930s? And also around the same time, I learned that there was a real minister who had appeared in like over 90 films in the 30s and 40s, who was like both a minister, but then played them on television, or rather in the movies. So all of that kind of just fell into place. And yeah, that's coming out this summer.
That is very exciting. And yeah, kind of the perfect instance of your worlds colliding. I know I have a couple other questions, but I first want to see if there are any questions or anything from the room or from whoever is on the chat version too. I think we're good for now. We're good on the chat. Then, we'll see one you're into.
How the question is, how do I think my career would have differed if it started in 2023? And that is a very good question, because the media landscape looks extremely different from the way it did almost 6 years ago when I first started at EW. I mean, as I said, I've seen a lot of change in that time at my publication. And it's very common right now for print magazines to shut down their print operations and move entirely to virtual. And I think a lot of the media industry is struggling to figure out how to make money right now. And it's a very ad-based model. So there is a lot of like push for clickbait and aggregation of news stories as opposed to original reporting, which I am not a fan of personally. And I think if I had come into EW now as I had 5.5 years ago, I don't know if I would have stayed or felt the impetus to stay, because I feel like the focus of my job would have had less time for doing things like starting a romance review column and pitching to do interviews and a lot of the stuff I love to do in my job, and been a lot more focused on kind of the regurgitated news side of things, which I personally hate writing. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure if I would have been able to get to the position I'm in now with kind of the new pivot and focus. But that being said, like, the media industry is very much in flux. It's not a particularly stable industry, but I think probably this problem will get worse before it gets better. But I also feel like this is not a sustainable business model. So ultimately, it's gonna have to go back to some of the like actual values of journalism and reporting, and not just be focused on clickbait. And I mean, this is something that people have been talking about since Caitlin and I were in college, like BuzzFeed and the lists and quote unquote clickbait was a problem then. And now it's just becoming something. I think it's been slowly on the rise, and we have to figure out a way to combat it and find audiences and readers in a way that isn't sort of the most easy like sugary treat version of that. Yeah, so being completely honest, I don't know if I would have kept pursuing this career if the landscape had looked the way it did. It would have just really depended on my managers and the opportunities I got.
And what, in your experience, and not necessarily just with EW, but kind of in the wider world of journalism that you sort of had a pulse on, finger on the pulse of, you said Entertainment Weekly's internship doesn't, or has changed, or doesn't exist in the form it did. But do you still see that there are those opportunities? What do they look like now if they are there, whether EW or elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think other places still have great internship programs. Journalism is weird in that weird in a good way, in that they have a surprising number of paid internships. They're minimum wage, but they are paid, which is better than not being paid at all. So I think a lot of magazines or places like the Hollywood Reporter or Variety, because I also did an internship at the Hollywood Reporter before I was at EW, still have those programs. And that's a really good way to meet other journalists, to be in a newsroom, make contacts. The internship at THR was much more like traditional in terms of I was doing a lot of transcription for other reporters and things like that. But I also did get the opportunity, like, you get to go to every staff meeting. I got to pitch stories and write some for the website. They sent me out to cover a few red carpets and events and did some interviews. So there is real interest there, particularly if you find great reporters that you connect with wherever you're doing this internship. There is like a fostering and an interest there, and a real desire for mentorship. You just have to find the right person for it. And then the other thing I would say, which I also was doing even when I was interning, is that freelancing and sort of, you can find who to submit a story pitch to on the internet very easily, for any website that you think would be a good fit for an idea that you have. And so just start pitching yourself. And once you get a yes, it's a lot easier to keep getting a yes from that editor once they've worked with you and they know that you are going to meet a deadline, you're going to produce clean copy, all of those sorts of things. Because I do think that the fact that I had interviews at the Hollywood Reporter, but then also other freelance stories that I'd written, helped me get the internship at Entertainment Weekly, and helped me from the get-go be able to be writing bigger stuff because they knew that I had the experience and could do it.
So there are glimmers of hope. There's things out there. Yeah, no, oh yeah, we've got a question here in the room.
Hi, thank you for coming today. I hope you can hear me okay.
Can you hear you good, Maureen?
Yes, I can. And if it goes out, I'll just ask Caitlin to repeat the
Yeah.
question.
Okay. I am a staff member at William Mary, who's also like, I was an alum as well. And I'm trying to, balance creativity with work. And I wanted to know if you could talk more about like, before you left your job at USC, how that was like with the balance, and like, how you kind of kept your spirits up with creativity while balancing a day job. Just a little bit more about your experience with that.
Yeah, I will say like my job at USC sort of taught me to be more precious and establish fiercer boundaries around those things because of the experience I had before I left. But it really is just about finding a schedule that works for you. So for instance, with my fiction writing, like there's all different schools of thought about, write every day or write this many hours a day or this many words a day. I don't do that. Since I write for work, my brain is not really up for more writing before or after work. And so I pretty much predominantly write on the weekends or write on vacations or days off, and just squeeze in as much as I can. And similarly, like I have directed a web series and I have done community theater, and it's just about finding those outlets and really fiercely holding to them as much as you can. Whether that's something that's happening in the hours after work in a group setting, like a theatrical endeavor, or whether that is something that you're just sort of claiming time for, like writing on your own or something of that nature. And I would just say, look for opportunities in your day job, if at all possible, to exercise some of those creative passions. Is there a project you can pitch or something you can do that will allow you to engage those things that you love? Like when I was at USC and doing the detectives exhibit is a great example of like, I was doing research and writing copy and getting to spend time with this thing that I loved, in addition to doing a lot of administrative tasks that were boring and I didn't want to be doing.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions in the room or online? Oh yeah, oh yeah. Hi, I was wondering, how do you feel like the switch from print to digital affected your job at EW, if at all? Or if you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, it has definitely affected it, probably less than some people, because I always was a digital first writer and was always writing news stories. So it was more like I have wanted to get away from some of that news writing and hoped as I moved up at EW that I would, because that was what the model used to be, is that you would move entirely over to print writing and not be doing a lot of that digital news writing. But sadly, as we've gone to digital only, that's just really not the case. Everybody is doing a little bit of the news writing. So that's definitely part of it, is sort of like losing that path to escape from that chore that I do not enjoy as part of my job. But it's also, I thought that it would damage our access in Hollywood, honestly. Like I thought that shows and films would be reluctant to work with us because we don't have like a print cover or a big print feature to offer. And there has been a little bit of that, but because we still have digital covers and digital features, and honestly, more people read the internet than they do read print magazines, it hasn't been what I thought it would be. And in fact, the access really only is an issue if we don't want to do any of those additional things, the digital covers or spotlights or things. But in terms of, going to places and being like, we want to do a digital cover. People are still really excited about that and want to do it and are coming actively to us and pitching them to us. Definitely budget has changed a lot because print was costing a lot. And so they have cut our budget with getting rid of print, which makes it harder to do some of those really cool things. But yeah, I mean, so much of my work was already like digitally and website focused. And the great thing is that there's no word limit. So you don't have to play what I used to call trying to fit a 100-word story on a tiny grain of rice. Because, you know, we would have things in the magazine that were literally like a 25-word box in a sidebar, and you'd have to find a way to convey information in that, which is a great writing exercise, but exceedingly frustrating, especially when you do like a great interview and you feel like you have all this amazing content and then you can't include any of it. And online, that's not a
Getting the
thing.
SAG Awards on YouTube, and no one got
Yeah.
cut off. So there's pros and cons of yeah.
Exactly.
I think we have one other question in the chat that I saw pop up. Do you see that on your end?
Do you think a job like this is attainable if you're not in a city like LA or NYC? That is a really good question. So when I started, the answer was 100% no. It was really, really obsessive about, you know, you need to be in New York or LA and come into the office every day. And that's where the screenings are. That's where the talent and the interviews and all of that is happening. To a degree, that is still true. I do think there is more flexibility now with the shift to remote work that occurred with the pandemic. A lot of my interviews that used to be in person are now over Zoom or virtually because it's easier to corral talent and get them to do a Zoom interview from their hotel room after they wrap shooting for the day than it is to like wait till they're in LA or New York to have lunch with them or whatever. So in terms of having access to people, it has certainly increased. I will be honest and say that a lot of these companies are very old school and resistant to this change and are trying to force people to go back into the office, are trying to insist that you be New York or LA based. But a lot of us are pushing back against that as well. And I think we're moving towards a model where that will be less and less the case. Now, that being said, there are still going to be some things that are really necessary you be in that place. So, you know, if you want to cover theater, you should probably live in New York. If you want to cover award shows, you should probably live in Los Angeles where all of them are happening. But, you know, so I would say 80 to 90%, yes, that's still the case, but there's a 10% room for being remote based. And I think that it's growing and will continue to grow because this sort of physically in the office requirement will become increasingly unsustainable, or at least I hope so, because I hate commuting.
You're talking about the award shows. We're almost out of time, but if I'm trying to win my Oscar pool, what are your, do you have any favorites for next week? It feels
Oh,
like all over the
gosh.
place.
Well, it definitely seems that Everything Everywhere is the favorite for Best Picture. I think that's a good bet. The acting races are more uncertain than I feel like they've ever been. So I will say, like, Ke-Huy Quan seems like a pretty safe bet for supporting actor. Despite the fact that things have been a little bit all over the map, I would still put my money on Angela Bassett finally winning an Oscar. And I really, really don't know whether it's going to be Michelle Yeoh or Cate Blanchett. I feel like that is such a toss-up. And Best Actor, it could be Fraser, it could be Butler, it could be Colin Farrell. I really, really don't know. Part of me is inclined to say it will be Austin Butler because the Academy is obsessed with biopics. And frankly, his performance is better than many of the past biopic
They keep
performances.
getting progressively better, but
Yeah, they do keep improving. So at least there's that.
Well, Maureen, thank you so much. This was awesome. Thank you to whoever was online with us. And we had a great room in person here today that you can only see a snippet of, but we've got a very wide classroom full of with awesome people too. But yeah, thank you. And thank you for waking up so early to be part of this with us on the East Coast.
Of course, you're very welcome. I mean, I feel like panels like this were really essential in sort of my figuring out what I wanted to do or what possible paths might be. If all of you want to write down my email, it's Maureen, MAUREEN Lenker, LENKER @EW.com. If you ever have any other questions or want advice, like I'm here. I know I would not have gotten to this spot without people doing the same for me. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And I will try to help in any way I can. I don't know that I can get you a job, but I can certainly give you advice.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Maureen. It was really good to see you. Hopefully I'll see you in person at something again soon. But
Yeah, I'm coming to New York at the end of March. I'll text you.
oh, cool. Let's talk. All right. But yeah, thank you so much. And I'll talk to you soon. And good luck as your day is just really starting there. So appreciate it. Bye, Maureen.
Thank you. Have a great day.
See ya.